Hi guys, my name is Sean. I'm a houseplant enthusiast from Jakarta, Indonesia. I like to nerd out to the science behind how we can keep our houseplants happy and to multiply them in our homes. So if you're into that kind of content, please do subscribe to my channel and send me likes. In today's video, I'm going to share with you everything I know about fertilizing. Disclaimer here, I've got a cheat sheet because there's a lot of information here today that I need to go through and they're all very important. And second of all, I'm not a biologist or a botanist or a scientist. I know maybe a little bit more than the average gardener about nutrients and plants and soil and such, but I'm not by no means an expert. So I'm going to keep things a little bit basic for you guys as well so that it's not too crazy or overwhelming. Mas, sorry. Alright, so I've gotten a few comments on my plants and some of you guys are saying, oh, you have some beautiful plants, what do you fertilize them with? And I find it's a very funny question for me because I don't attribute a plant's success or growth to fertilizing. Let me explain. First of all, food for the plants are actually sunlight, not the fertilizers. So plants take in sunlight and with the help of water and carbon dioxide, it completes a process called photosynthesis. So that's the basic for every plant, and every plant requires that. When you give plants favorable conditions for photosynthesis, it gives you gorgeous plants, basically. So the tip for getting plants that grow well and beautiful is number one, the sunlight. Number two would be the proper watering. Number three, that it's disease-free, pest-free. And number four would be your fertilizing, your nutrients. Let me explain. If you have a plant and you have grown it in a very undesirable living conditions, whether it's low light or if it's like improper watering where you keep like underwatering and keep overwatering it and it just keeps declining and growing and declining, no matter what fertilizer you use, the plant's not going to be successful. So plant care, I would say number one is the most important part. So if you haven't seen my video on sunlight, watering and soil, do check that out because that will help you understand this episode better. That being said though, plants cannot live a meaningful and healthy life without nutrients. If their soil is completely devoid of nutrients, they will not be happy and they will not be thriving. So in nature, plants actually receive nutrients from the environment. Here are some examples of where they get nutrients from. Manure, carcass, which is the dead animals, decomposing plant material, your fallen leaves, your dead leaves and flowers and fruits, and earthworms actually exist in abundance in nature, and they actually do help with the composting and creating organic material in the soil. So earthworms are a really important part of the ecosystem. And volcanic materials, natural sediments, carbonized materials, which means things that are burned and charred, like forest fires or volcanoes and things like that. Also rainwater and water that runs in the ground, they carry a lot of nutrients with them. And plants actually evolved through millions of years in the region that they're specific to, and they're used to the kind of nutrients and growing medium that they have over there. For example, you have your rainforests, deserts and lakes, and all plants are just different. They're not made the same. One example is the carnivorous plant like this pinguicula over here. Carnivorous plants actually grow in areas where there's no minerals or nutrients in the soil, and they actually get it from the animals that they feed onto. And if you add fertilizer or nutrients into the soil that you're growing at home, these carnivorous plants will rot and die off. So you also have your desert plants like your cactus, and they don't require a lot of nutrients. They have a different set of nutrient requirement than say your rainforest type plants like your ferns and your caladiums and your calatheas. And there are actually three common nutrients that are needed for plant growth. And number one is your nitrogen, and this is very essential for plant growth. So nitrogen is very, very important for leaves and the chlorophyll. Phosphorus is the second one. It aids in photosynthesis and stimulating growth, and it hastens maturity. It's also known to help develop flowers and fruits faster. So if you're growing something for the flowers or the fruits, you definitely want to have something with a higher phosphorus in it. And next you have the potassium, and this increases the overall health of the plant, healthy stems, roots and leaves. And it also helps maintain and increase the immunity of the plant towards disease and pests. So again, the three important nutrients are nitrogen for leaves, phosphorus for flowers and fruiting, and potassium K for immunity and overall health. So this NPK is what you would read in a lot of the labels in your commercial fertilizers. We'll go through that in a bit. There are also other micronutrients that the plants actually need. Calcium, magnesium, sulfur, iron, manganese, copper, zinc, boron. And you don't really need to know the details on all, just know that these minerals are available in nature as well as in our fertilizers. So there are actually different types of fertilizers, and the two main categories are number one, your chemical fertilizers, and number two would obviously be your natural fertilizers. So let's quickly go through them. For chemical fertilizers, there's two kinds that I use. I don't know what's available in your region, but one is this Grow More fertilizer. It comes in a powder form, and you would actually mix this with water and just water your plants with it. I'll show you that in a bit. And the second type is your slow release fertilizer. These are those tiny round pellets, and they release the nutrients over time in your soil. And then you have your natural fertilizer, and what I use most often is the worm casting, and that is when you are composting a lot of like your unused materials, like your garbage. Sorry, it's basically when you have compost and you throw worms in there and they just eat all that compost, and then they produce this poop material. So basically worm casting is worm poop, and it's very beneficial for the plant because it provides nutrients and also a lot of organic material and a healthy bacterial ecosystem in your soil. And you also have manure, and this is actually a very, very excellent source of nutrients. However, I don't really use it because number one, it smells really badly. I don't even want to touch it with my hands. But also, in very, very rare cases, if they're not managed properly, they could give you E. coli and other diseases that you might bring back to your homes. Next, you have your seaweed, which is very popular, and also a lot of people use aquarium water, like fish tank water, because that contains a lot of nutrients from the fish poop, I guess, and fish pee or whatever. I don't know. Do fish actually pee? I'm not sure. And then another beneficial one would be using rice water, and that's actually the water that you use to wash the uncooked rice with. When you have this water, it's actually full of a lot of starch that gives you a lot of beneficial bacteria and in your soil, and then it also releases some NPK into the soil as well. So that's a very good source. Some people use banana peels. I know that for Indonesians, they like to put banana peels behind their staghorn ferns. I don't really know if that's really good for them or not, but I hear that some people actually submerge their banana peel in water and just leave it there for a few days, and that water will take in all that nutrients. And if I'm not wrong, banana is really rich in potassium, so I'm guessing that banana peels are going to be rich in potassium, but I don't know. Next, you have your coffee grounds, which is probably very acidic. You have your ground tea leaves. People crush eggshells. I'm sure that's for calcium. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm just going by instinct here. But the best natural fertilizers, surprisingly, is actually your rainwater. It's also free of charge. First of all, rain, before it comes down to our ground level, it's got all this time to collect a lot of nutrients, a lot of oxygen and nitrogen, and there's acidity in rainwater that actually will unlock a lot of the micronutrients in the soil, because actually there are a lot of nutrients in the soil that the plants cannot absorb unless they are released by this rainwater. So let's talk about, I thought I heard something hiss at me. I'm going to talk a little bit about pros and cons for chemicals versus natural. And for chemical fertilizers, one of the important pros is that it's reliably measurable nutrients. So you can actually test it in a lab, like how much of each nutrient contents do you have. You can control it very well. It is also faster acting. For example, this Grow More that you use, when you mix it with water and you water your plants, the plants will absorb it almost immediately. So that's helpful. And it contains NPK in a way that is significant, that natural fertilizers, you can't really determine the NPK value in them. And chemical fertilizers are actually cheaper usually, and it's actually more concentrated, which makes it very easy to transport. This is also important to know. That's why you have to dilute it. You only need a trace amount of chemical fertilizers for your plants. You don't need a lot of amounts. And some of the cons for chemical fertilizer. One, it's usually very acidic. It also affects the beneficial microbes that are existing in soil. And it's too soluble in water, and that's not good, which means that a lot of the nutrients are actually going to be washed away instead of being absorbed by the plants. And when fertilizer water gets leached away from the plants, it actually becomes a pollutant. And I want you to look up this word, eutrophication. Eutrophication. I don't know if I said that right. Eutrophication. That's very important. It's when there's this super algae that's growing in our lakes and rivers and seas, and they're caused by over-fertilizing, by chemical fertilizers. And they're going to create a lot of problems in our oceans eventually. So be mindful of that. And chemical fertilizers are usually salt-based, and salt is actually not very good for your soil in the long run, for your plants as well. And it's easy to over-fertilize when you are using chemical fertilizers. You can burn your plants and your roots when you use chemical fertilizers improperly. Natural fertilizers, what are some of the pros? It's got complex microorganisms, and it creates a beautiful ecosystem in the soil. It's usually sustainable for the environment. And there's also more varieties of nutrients available in natural fertilizers. It's very gentle for your plants. It doesn't cause burns, and it's not easy to over-fertilize them with natural sources. Some of the cons for natural fertilizer is that the percentage of nutrients are actually very low, so you actually need more amounts to give you that nutrient that you need. It's immeasurable, which means that you cannot measure the amount of nutrients accurately, and each batch of fertilizer may contain different amounts of nutrients because you can't really control it in a natural setting. Natural fertilizers take up a lot more space, and actually when you have too many organic materials, you can actually rot the plant, just so you know. And natural fertilizers do cost more usually. So yeah, so that's the pros and cons. And let's talk a little bit about NPK and how you read it. NPK is usually 3 ratios. It's usually like, if you have equal amounts, you could have something like 10, 10, 10. Or if you have something with the more nitrogen, higher in N, it can be like 16, 10, 10. And actually the number here represents the percentage of that amount. Let's say you have 20 nitrogen, that's 20% of the weight of that chemical fertilizer is actually nitrogen. And just to remind you again, nitrogen actually helps with your leaves formation and your plant growth, and overall, oh my god, it's getting windy. Your P, phosphorus, is for flowering and fruiting, and your K is for your overall health and immune system. When in doubt, use equal parts, like 15, 15, 15 or 20, 20, 20. And there are also specific fertilizers for specific types of plants. For example, you have your cacti fertilizer and your orchid fertilizer, and some of you even have the tillandsia or the air plants fertilizer, and tons more. And these are fertilizers that are targeted towards that genus of plants, because every plant requires slightly different nutrients. For example, your cactus is not going to need a lot of nitrogen, first of all, because it doesn't have a lot of leaves to photosynthesize. So it's going to contain a little bit more phosphorus and potassium and other micronutrients that the cactus will need. So let's talk about when not to fertilize. When you bring a plant home and maybe it's still a bit stressed out or it's still recovering from a pest attack or disease, that's when you should not fertilize it. Let it recover first, let it chill out for a bit. And when the plant looks like it's already been fertilized, when you see those granules in the soil, or if you talk to the seller and you know that the plant has just recently been fertilized, don't do it immediately. Give it some time in between. Whoa. Okay. Okay. When you're propagating your cuttings, you don't want to fertilize it because, first of all, the plant is actually busy putting out roots, and if you fertilize your plant at this point, you may actually rot the root. You may actually burn the roots as well. When it's not a growing season, like your winter time, or when you're going through a period of low light, you should not fertilize your plants as much. You can still fertilize them a little bit. And when it's rainy and gloomy like it is right now, it's rainy season in Indonesia where it's raining a lot, and the light level is actually a lot lower. You don't want to fertilize them too much because your plant is not going to take in that much nutrients, and that excess nutrient in the soil is going to promote rot or burn in the roots. When to fertilize? Okay. Oh, okay. I'm just gonna leave it as it is. It's too windy right now. When to fertilize? You should fertilize when you plant. I'll keep trying to move this in an upright position and it keeps falling over. Sorry. You should fertilize when your plants are showing signs of nutrient deficiency. And here are some of the common signs. Number one, stunted growth. When it's putting out new leaves that are small, tiny, or it doesn't unfurl properly. Or when it's slow growing, that's probably one reason. Or when you see chlorosis, and that's when the chlorophyll, the green parts of the leaves, is not forming correctly, where it's like light green or even yellowish in color. That's when you may need to fertilize it a bit. When your plants look like it's happy and it's growing, that's also when you should be fertilizing it because you want to give it that extra boost and make it even more happier. And when you haven't fertilized your plants in a while, that's probably when you should fertilize it next. I don't really go by a schedule, I go by gut instinct sometimes when it comes to fertilizing. And when it's favorable weather conditions, like when it's sunny, it's beautiful out, you're going through a beautiful season like summertime or long periods of like good sun, that's also when you can fertilize, give them that extra boost. And in terms of the amount of fertilizing, I always eyeball it. I use my feelings. I tend to under-fertilize everything. This caladium is totally blocking my face, isn't it? Always under-fertilize it a bit. I use all kinds of fertilizers. I use a combination of each of these fertilizers because I don't want to because I don't want to rely on just one type of fertilizer. I believe that they are all good in their own right. Read your label. A lot of the instructions are going to tell you how much fertilizer to add and how often you should add the fertilizers. Again, when you over-fertilize something, you risk the plant getting rot or fertilizer burn, and that's not a good look on the plant. Different growing mediums actually absorb and release nutrients differently, and I'm not an expert in that, but I'm going to quickly go through some of the different ones. Here are the growing mediums that contains zero nutrients, none. Anything that's made with coconut, which means your cocoa chips, cocoa peat, coconut husks, and perlite, leca, and distilled water that they contain no nutrients. And for growing mediums with nutrients are I'm going to list them from high nutrients to low nutrients. Number one, your compost, peat moss, your dried twigs and leaves, bark, charcoal, burnt rice hulls, and rice hulls. Your undistilled water, even air do contain nutrients, by the way. And some of our plants that have trichomes, like your bromeliads, air plants, they can actually take nutrients from the air, which is really amazing. And then you have the pumice, your sands, and your rock. And another thing that I want to discuss very quickly is the soil pH. Soil pH is very important, even though I never measure it, and I'm not a commercial grower, so I don't think we need to go to the extent. But we just need to know that improper pH value, which means that if it's too acidic or alkaline, which can be caused by the soil, the nutrients, or caused by the type of water you water your plants with, they can cause improper absorption of the nutrients. So if that's a concern for you, do measure it, and there are a lot of amendments you can add to your soil that will help you give that leverage to your pH balance. Different plants also require a different pH value, and I'm not going into details on that, and I don't actually get into that with my own plants, and they seem to be okay so far. So do that on your own prerogative, do your own research if that's a concern for you. And next I'm going to talk about the very controversial B1 vitamin, and this is widely used in Asia, in Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines, Singapore, and I believe this is a Thai-made product. And I'm going to give you my 2 cents on this product. I'm not an expert, and I've seen a lot of research done online and a lot of videos, and actually for the most part it's known to be a placebo. It doesn't really known to do anything for the plants. It doesn't have any scientific backing or scientific evidence. However, a lot of people do swear by it, and I do own some of these, and I do use it from time to time, and it does make me feel like I'm an amazing plant parent, make me feel special, and my plants feel special, but deep down I know that it doesn't do anything. So I'm actually going to do some tests on vitamin B1, and it's going to take many months to see the results. I'm going to see if the B1 actually have any effects on the health of the plants. I'm also going to do a fertilizer video where I'm going to grow a few pots of plants with fertilizer and some without, so I can show you the effects of fertilizing on plants. but that video is going to take months to make, so be patient with me. So I'm going to quickly show you guys how I fertilize some plants, so come along with me on this impromptu fertilizing tour. So I've got some slow release fertilizer, and this is high in potassium. So I'm going to give this to this cactus, which I haven't fertilized in a long time. So just kind of put a little bit here and there, like disperse it, and when the rain rains on this plant, on the soil, it will slowly release the nutrients for this cactus. And it's putting out this new growth. It's been battling scale for a very long time, and finally it's doing well. This actually flowered for me before, so yeah. And here we have some gloriosum that's dancing in the wind, and here's a worm casting that is available locally. And I really like this brand, by the way. I'm not sponsored by any means, but you know, you can actually put the worm casting on the top of the soil. But first of all, you want to avoid having it around the main stem area. You want to go around it because you don't want to rot the main stem, because this is very rich organic material. And I also use worm casting in my soil mix. So I would actually just grab a few handfuls and just mix it into the soil, so it's always in there. So whenever I'm repotting something, there's always going to be fresh worm casting in it. So in this case, yeah, I'm going to leave this be. It's going to rain, and all that worm casting is going to be leach into, it's going to be soaked into the soil, and it's going to be absorbed by the plant. I'm going to actually add a little bit more because this plant is doing really well. Yeah, there you go. Cutie. Here's a canna lily, and very much like the strelitzia or the bird of paradise, this plant is very, very thirsty, and it's also very, very hungry. It would appreciate constant feed, nutrients, fertilizing. So some plant species do require fertilizers more often than others. So generally speaking, plants that take more light and grows faster and bigger, they will need more fertilizing than plants that live in lower light condition. For example, this Tomatophyllum beneficent, it's also known as the Tomatophyllum salum. It used to be a philodendron. This is in full sun, so, and they appreciate it. So I will need to fertilize it a lot more often. It responds really well to fertilizing. Whenever I fertilize it, I see faster growth. So I'm going to quickly show you how I fertilize my orchids. First of all, I use this fungicide, Dithane brand. Not to say that it's the best brand. I just pour a little bit in it. I don't even measure it. I may have poured a little bit too much because my eyes were on the camera. But you just eyeball it. It doesn't really harm the plant. It kills fungi most on your leaf. And here's the orchid fertilizer. And I do this every 2 to 4 weeks. Let me see. I just eyeball it. Tiny amount. It smells really strong, so you just want tiny amounts of everything. And finally, I add a little bit of, this is Curacron. This is a pesticide. Just like a drop or two, that's it. And then I would go ahead and add water to it. And I know for all my orchids, I only need half a sprayer. I don't need to fill it up to the top. And we are ready to give it a good shake, and then we'll spray down the orchids. Make sure you get the leaves and the roots wet. The only thing that you don't want to get fertilizer and pesticide on is your flowers. If you have any blooms, don't get them. Don't get in contact with these fertilizers and pesticides, because these are very harsh. So I just spray down thoroughly the leaves and the roots. And these are actually orchids too. That's a cool one. Look at that root it's putting out. And the fungicide may leave a little bit of the white powdery residue on the leaves, and that's okay. It means that the fungicide is basically working. It's preventing mold and spores from happening. And here are some Vanda orchids. They take full sun, so they definitely need to be fertilized more often than your other orchids. Look at this beauty. Alright, I think I'm all set. And here's a grow more fertilizer, and this particular fertilizer gets absorbed immediately into the plant, so it's very, very strong. And this is the NPK 32 10 10, so it's very, very high in nitrogen. This is good for leaf growth. And this is what the inside looks like. And what I normally do is I just eyeball it because it's clumsy in there. Yeah, I take about this much. That's all you need for a watering can. I don't even measure it. I just fill it up to the top. And the rest is common sense. So another way to fertilize is by bottom watering. This is the same Bromore fertilizer that I used in my watering can earlier. In this case, I just eyeball it. I just use like this little tiny amount. Dissolve it in the water, mix it in, and then I'm gonna put in some plants. This is a Peperomia raindrop, Polybotrya. And it's so thirsty. You can see that the leaves are super limp, super soft, and the pot is very, very lightweight. So just put it in here, and then it's just gonna soak up that water. Here we have a beautiful begonia as well. Maluna, if I'm not wrong, I can't remember the name. I just lost my Instagram account, so I can't check the plant ID. I remember that I tagged this plant yesterday. Hopefully I'll get my account back. And here is the Peperomia incana that we did a video on I think about 5 to 6 weeks ago. And as you can see, the cuttings are doing great. But this is very thirsty. The soil is very dry, it's in terracotta pot, and I know I haven't watered it in a while. So with Peperomia cuttings, when you propagate it direct into soil, you want to keep it on the dry side. And then here we have a Aglaonema pictum tricolor. This is also my propagate. This is a top cutting that I just stuck into soil, and I also keep it on the dry side by water it every 2 days or so. And in this setup with the terracotta pot and my general purpose potting mix, it dries up really fast. As you can see, the soil is bone dry. And with terracotta pot, sometimes you can see, I know it's a bit dark in here on the screen, but you can see if it's wet because the lower portion of the pot is going to be a little bit darker, a shade in color. So I'm going to plop that in, and I can also see that the water level has gone down a bit in this basin because the water is being soaked up by some of the plants here. So I'm going to top it up a little bit. Yeah, so this is how you can also bottom water with fertilizers. My hands are a pack of slow release fertilizers, and this one NPK says 13 13 13, which means it's a balanced fertilizer. And I would just sprinkle a little bit on the plant so anywhere between 3 to 6 months, because they do deplete over time. And I don't remember when I do each of my plants. I just use my feelings. Yeah. So here's a philodendron Birkin, and I don't see any pellets left. I think the previous ones may have been depleted. So yeah, I'm just gonna add a little bit here at probably about 10, less than 10. And here's a Plumanii. I don't count, I just use my feelings. And this one was actually lately fertilized. I shouldn't have fertilized it. So yeah, just just know your plants. Just have a relationship with them and you'll have a feeling of when to fertilize. The slow releases tend to be a bit safer because it doesn't release the nutrients all at once. And sometimes when you have aerial roots, you can go ahead and fertilize them. You can spray them down with fertilizer water because that aerial root will absorb the nutrients and it will promote bigger leaves and faster growth. So let me show you how I do my cactus and succulents. So this is a fertilizer specially made for cactus, and I poke a little hole here. So what I'm going to do is I have this little squeeze bottle. I fill it up halfway with water, and I'm just going to do like, I don't know, 4 or 5 drops, not a lot. I believe in frequent fertilizing, but in minute amounts because this is safer for the plants. And I'm just going to give it a good shake. So this guy actually have no bottom hole, drainage hole, so I have to water it very carefully. It's been living in here for about 9 months now. So I'm just gonna go ahead and water lightly around it, and that's it. I can do the same for a lot of my cacti as well. I water them very thoroughly. I try not to get not the leaves, but the body of the cactus. I try not to get it wet because I don't think they appreciate getting wet. It may rot them off. So I'm just gonna target the potting medium. So yeah, that's one way that I would fertilize my cacti. Another way that I'll do it is, and one more tip for cacti and succulents. I always water them when it's sunny outside. And I do it in the morning because this gives the plant enough time to absorb that water and fertilizer, and the sun will help pull all that up to the body through the plant. This is which means it's less likely for it to rot off. So this is another way to just bottom water. I'm just going to reuse some of the water here. So another way that you can do it is just to bottom water them, and this is a better way, in my opinion, of watering cacti and succulents. Because we added a little bit, we're adding more water. I'm going to put a few more drops in here. Okay. And I do this about once every month or so. I water them every 1 to 2 weeks, again depending on the weather. If we're having like a lot of direct sunlight, a lot of really sunny weather, I will water them more often. But we're facing a rainy season, so I'm watering them about once every 2 weeks-ish. Yeah, I'm just gonna let it sit like this for a little while, for about 2 to 3 minutes, and then I'm gonna take it out and I'm gonna put more. I reuse the water actually. I know that some of you are against it. Maybe you may promote pest transfers between plants. I haven't had that problem, knock on wood. This is not wood, but yeah, you get my point. I'm a cheap person. I don't like to waste my fertilizer, so I let them share it. So I hope that this video is useful for you and deepening your understanding on plant nutrients and fertilizing. I'm at Botanist on Instagram. If you want to follow me on there, DM me if you have any questions on plant care and propagations. I'll try my best to get back to you. Meanwhile, do take care and stay safe. I will see you in the next video. Bye!